Laughter erupted across the firing range. Every shot from Elira Voss slammed straight into the bullseye, so precise that the wooden target shuddered with each impact. Yet instead of respect, the male soldiers around her howled, clapped, and jeered. "Don't tell me the SEAL fleet kept a doll around just to decorate the range," sneered Lieutenant Kaylin Drix loud enough for everyone to hear. Elira gripped her MK-11, the stock pressed deep into her shoulder. The mocking smiles, the scornful eyes, each felt like a needle piercing her skin. Then came the heavy footsteps from behind. Commander Rhogar Senn, the head of the SEAL unit, strode forward. The entire range froze instantly. His cold gray eyes didn't fall on Kaylin nor on the mocking crowd. They fixed squarely on the silver medal glinting on Elira's chest. In that moment, the laughter died. The packed firing range felt as if it had been struck silent, frozen in place. Before her name echoed across the firing range, Elira Voss was just a child growing up in the shadow of war. Her father, Orvin Voss, had been a legendary marksman in the expeditionary forces, a man whose eyes never trembled behind the scope. But he fell in a campaign that the official record dismissed with 2 words, "missing presumed." At the memorial, the family received no body, only a silver medal handed over in silence. Elira was 10 years old. Her small hands clutched that medal so tightly they bled. That day she swore to walk the unfinished path her father had left behind. Elira's childhood was not filled with dolls or dresses. She learned to disassemble rifles by 12, firing her first shot under the guidance of her uncle, an old gunsmith. Every time the stock kicked back against her shoulder, she remembered her father's words. "A bullet doesn't just pierce a target, it pierces the fear in your heart." But her journey was never easy. At every academy, every training camp, the same whispers followed her. What would a girl know about war? To them, she was an oddity, a mistake waiting to happen, proof that failure wore a woman's face. Elira refused to bend. She enlisted in the SEAL training program, a crucible where survival rates were lower than the odds of catching a stray bullet. Every day she rose earlier than the others, ran farther shot longer. Every night she laid the silver medal by her pillow as if her father was still watching. That belief forged her into one of the sharpest shooters in the entire cohort. Yet for men like Kaylin Drix, skill was irrelevant compared to Prejudice. He and his circle would never acknowledge her. To them, Elira's presence was a joke, a stain on their brotherhood. Elira understood her greatest battle wasn't against a target 100 meters away. It was against an entire system that had already decided she didn't belong. The SEAL training compound was designed to break even the strongest men. For Elira Voss, it was more than that. It was a battlefield where every step forward was dragged under by the weight of doubt. On the obstacle courses, she scaled walls slick with mud faster than most of her peers. During endurance swims, she pushed through currents until her lungs burned. On the range, her bullets split the bullseye again and again. But none of it seemed to matter. Each victory only fueled the contempt of those unwilling to accept her. At the center of it all was Lieutenant Kaylin Drix. A seasoned operator with a reputation for ruthlessness, he embodied the old guard's belief that women had no place among them. Every time Elira succeeded, Drix found a way to twist it into failure. A missed second on a timed run, a minor slip in formation, he seized on these, amplifying them, before the unit turning them into evidence of her supposed weakness. You see, Drix barked during one debrief, "Precision on paper doesn't make a soldier. Out there she'll break. And when she does, she'll take the rest of you down with her." The words stuck. Doubt spread like smoke through the barracks. Fellow trainees who once cheered her quiet strength now kept their distance, afraid to be dragged into Drix's crosshairs. Elira ate alone, trained alone, slept with the weight of silence pressing down from every bunk around her. Even the system itself seemed aligned against her. Reports went missing. Scores from her marksmanship trials appeared mysteriously altered. Drix had connections in administration officers who shared his prejudice, who whispered that Elira was nothing more than a publicity stunt, a headline for recruitment posters. She protested once daring to bring the discrepancies to the attention of a review board. The panel, cold and indifferent, dismissed her concerns in less than 5 minutes. "Focus on your training." "Candidate Voss," one officer said without looking up from his papers, "the program doesn't have time for complaints." That was when Elira realized the scope of what she faced. It wasn't just Kaylin Drix. It was the system itself, a hierarchy of men who would rather see her destroyed than admit she had earned her place. Still, she didn't yield. She poured herself deeper into training, each round fired at the range a silent act of defiance. Yet the more she resisted, the more relentless the opposition became. Tasks were quietly reassigned to test her limits. Equipment she needed vanished before drills. On night marches, rumors spread that she was the reason their scores lagged. The weight of isolation pressed heavier with each passing week. She wasn't fighting one man anymore. She was fighting the shape of the institution itself, a machine designed to grind her down. And at its core, smiling in the shadows, was Kaylin Drix, waiting for the moment Elira Voss would finally break. The breaking point came on a night that should have secured Elira's place among the best. It was a critical evaluation stealth navigation under blackout conditions. Every movement tracked, every decision scored. Elira executed flawlessly. Her route was clean, her timing impeccable. For the first time, she thought she might silence the voices stacked against her. But the report told another story. When results were posted, her score had plummeted. Critical errors she never made were listed in red. The word failure hung beside her name. She stormed to the office, demanding answers. Kaylin Drix was already there, leaning against the wall, arms folded, the smirk on his face sharper than any blade. "You should learn Voss," he drawled. "The system decides who belongs. And you don't." The ruling was swift and brutal. Elira was suspended from training, her record marked with an official recommendation for dismissal. In the eyes of the program, she was already gone. That night, the barracks felt colder than ever. She sat alone on her bunk, stripping her rifle down to its pieces. The metal gleamed under the dim light, each part familiar, almost comforting. For years, the weapon had been her language, her truth. Now, even that seemed hollow. Her hands trembled as she touched the silver metal on her chest. For the first time, the weight of it felt unbearable. Maybe her father had been wrong. Maybe the world didn't want her to finish what he started. Maybe she was nothing but a mistake clinging to his ghost. The thought of walking away clawed at her, to vanish quietly, to let the machine grind on without her. The laughter of Drix and his circle echoed in her ears, mingling with the silence of the officers who had never defended her. Then a sound broke the stillness, footsteps, hesitant but deliberate. At her door stood Edrin Kaur, the grizzled armorer who had spent decades maintaining weapons for the unit. He carried no smile, only a small data chip held between scarred fingers. "I don't like games," he said bluntly, "and I hate seeing skill buried by lies." He placed the chip on her desk, everything they erased from tonight's trial. "It's all here." Elira stared at the chip, hardly daring to breathe. For the first time in weeks, the weight pressing on her chest lifted just slightly. The system had tried to erase her, but perhaps, just perhaps, it had overlooked the power of those who still believed in truth. Elira Voss did not vanish as the system expected. Suspension gave her something far more dangerous than dismissal time, and she would use every moment. By day, she kept her head down, invisible to the sneers and whispers that trailed her through the compound. By night, she disappeared into the abandoned supply hangars at the edge of the base. There, surrounded by dust and silence, she built her sanctuary. The first night, she laid out the rifle parts in perfect rows, hands steady despite the storm inside her. She replayed the footage from the data chip Edrin Kaur had given her. Every erased detail, every manipulated frame came back to life on the small projector. They had tried to bury her performance, but the truth was intact, glowing in the shadows. Kaur joined her often, his gruff voice echoing off the steel walls. "Your aim is already lethal, but precision is nothing without endurance." He dragged out heavy crates, obsolete training weights, defunct armor, even rusted vehicle parts, and fashioned them into brutal regimens. Push, pull, lift until her arms shook, then lift again. Elira embraced the pain. Each bead of sweat felt like defiance. Each blister was a promise that she would not be erased. One evening, another figure slipped into the hangar. Taryn Vale, a communications specialist once saved by Orvin Voss in a forgotten skirmish, now owed a debt he could never repay. "Your father carried me out of fire when no one else would," Taryn said quietly. "If they silence you, they silence him too." Taryn's expertise unlocked a new weapon. He tapped into secure lines tracing the trails of falsified reports. Every thread led back to Kalen Drix and his allies. Together, Taryn and Core wove a web of evidence data logs, tampered recordings, hidden transmissions. Elira would not only return, she would return armed with proof sharper than bullets. But training came first. Night after night, the hangar transformed into a crucible. Elira fired blindfolded trusting sound and instinct. She sprinted across cracked concrete while Core hurled debris into her path. Taryn timed her movements, pushing her to shave milliseconds off every action. There were moments she faltered when exhaustion clawed at her bones. She would collapse against the wall, breath-ragged vision swimming. In those moments, Core's gravelly voice anchored her. "Your father never quit. Neither do you." And she didn't. Weeks blurred into months. The suspension dragged on, but Elira was no longer the cadet they had tried to erase. Her body hardened, her reflexes sharpened, her will tempered like steel under flame. In the shadows of the forgotten hangar, a soldier was reborn. Not the outcast mocked on the firing line, but a force the system had not foreseen. The plan was simple but daring. When the next public evaluation came, an event impossible to hide or falsify, Elira would step into the light. She would prove her skill beyond doubt and at the same time unleash the evidence of Drix's corruption. Failure would mean the end of her career, the end of her father's legacy, and perhaps worse. But success would shatter the lie that had strangled her since the beginning. On the final night before the trial, Elira stood in the hangar, the silver metal warm against her chest. She chambered around, raised her rifle, and whispered into the silence. "This time, they'll see. All of them." The shot cracked through the darkness, perfect, absolute. The day of the evaluation arrived like a storm. It was the annual marksmanship and endurance trial held before senior commanders, and a gallery of officers flown in to witness the future of the SEAL program. Cameras lined the perimeter. No one could alter the records this time. Every movement, every shot, every second would be preserved in full view. Candidates filed into the range in crisp formation. Elira Voss should not have been there. Her suspension remained active, her name stricken from the official roster. But as the unit assembled, a quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. There she was walking with measured steps, silver metal gleaming against her uniform. Kalen Drix's jaw tightened. He had orchestrated her disappearance, erased her victories, and convinced half the unit she was already gone. To see her standing alive in front of the command staff felt like an open insult. He stepped forward, voice sharp. "Commander Senn. This candidate is not cleared to participate." The murmurs swelled. Eyes turned to Rhogar Senn, his presence towering over the formation. The commander's expression was unreadable as his gaze shifted from Drix to Elira. Then he spoke, his voice carrying like thunder. "If she wishes to prove herself, let her. The range has no prejudice, only results." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Drix's protest died on his tongue. The order was final. The trial began. Each candidate fired in sequence, their shots echoing against the steel walls of the compound. Some hit well, others faltered. Every score was projected onto the screen overhead, impossible to deny or distort. When her turn came, Elira stepped to the firing line. The world seemed to contract to the weight of the MK-11 in her hands, the hum of the crowd, the faint glint of the metal against her chest. She inhaled, exhaled, and fired. The first shot struck dead center. The second split the first. By the fifth, the crowd had fallen utterly silent. Every round cut the bullseye until the target looked carved by a blade. Drix's face drained of color. He whispered to an aide, but no falsification could touch the live feed. The truth was undeniable. Elira was out shooting them all. The trial escalated to moving targets. Drones streaked across the sky, weaving unpredictably. Elira tracked them with fluid precision, each bullet a stroke of inevitability. One by one, the drones shattered smoke curling into the air. By the final shot, even the officers in the gallery had risen to their feet. Then came the endurance course obstacles designed to strip away strength, to expose weakness. Weighted packs, mud pits, walls of rope and steel. Candidates staggered, some collapsed. Elira pushed forward, every muscle burning, every breath a war against her own body. Yet she did not falter. With each obstacle cleared, she reclaimed the space they had tried to steal from her. Near the end, her path crossed directly with Drix. He sneered, trying to block her lane. "You don't belong here, Voss," he hissed. She met his glare, sweat streaking her face, and answered with a single word, "Move." For the first time, Kaelin Drix hesitated. Elira surged past him, dragging herself over the final wall. She collapsed across the finish line chest, heaving mud staining her uniform. The crowd erupted not in laughter, not in scorn, but in a stunned roar of disbelief and admiration. Commander Rhogar Senn descended from the gallery boots, heavy against the concrete. He approached Elira, who struggled to her feet, standing tall despite the exhaustion. His eyes settled once more on the metal gleaming on her chest. The silence that followed was thunderous. Then, in a voice that carried across the compound, Senn declared, "Skill speaks louder than prejudice. And today, skill has spoken." The words hung in the air, undeniable, unshakable. Drix stood frozen, his authority unraveling before the entire command. The smirk that once shadowed his face was gone, replaced by the pale mask of a man who knew control was slipping away. The confrontation was not just over marksmanship or endurance, it was over truth itself, and in that moment everyone knew the tide had turned. And the applause still echoed when Elira Voss stepped off the course. Mud streaked her uniform, her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, but her eyes were steady, fixed not on the crowd, nor on Commander Senn, but on Kaelin Drix. For a moment he tried to stand tall, to pretend authority still clung to him. But Elira saw the twitch in his jaw, the sheen of sweat along his temple. The facade was crumbling. She reached into her pocket and drew out a small data chip, the one Edrin Core had pressed into her hand on the night she nearly quit. She held it aloft, its surface glinting beneath the floodlights. "This," she said, voice steady but sharp, "is the truth they tried to bury." The projector screens flickered. Terran Vale, hidden among the technical crew, had already hacked into the feed. The altered reports vanished, replaced with raw footage. The crowd watched as the erased night trial replayed in full Elira, navigating the course with flawless precision, her times clear, her results impeccable. Side by side, the falsified version appeared fabricated errors, times stretched her success, rewritten as failure. Gasps swept through the ranks. Officers leaned forward, murmuring to one another. The evidence was irrefutable. Elira's gaze locked on Drix. "You told me the system decides who belongs." "But the system doesn't belong to liars." The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time, Drix had no clever sneer, no cutting retort. The screens betrayed him in merciless clarity. Then, Terran pushed the feed further. Messages appeared, intercepted communications between Drix and sympathetic officers planning her removal. Every timestamp, every line of text painted the same picture, deliberate sabotage, a conspiracy to erase her from the program. The gallery erupted. Some officers shouted in outrage, others turned cold eyes toward Drix, already calculating their distance from him. Commander Rhogar Senn raised a hand, and silence fell again. He stepped down from the platform, his boots striking the ground like drumbeats. Standing before Elira and Drix, his gaze shifted between them. Lieutenant Drix Senn said voice hard as steel. "What do you have to say?" Drix stammered his words, collapsing before they left his throat. He looked around for support, but the allies who once laughed at his side now avoided his eyes. The circle had broken. Elira did not move. She simply stood shoulder-squared metal shining against her chest. Then came the moment that froze the compound. Senn extended his hand not to Drix, but to Elira. "Candidate Voss," he declared, his voice carrying like a verdict, "your record stands. Your skill is undeniable, and your integrity has exposed what cowardice sought to hide." The weight of his words struck the crowd like a wave. The silence deepened, and then no laughter, no mutters, no mockery. Only the sound of boots as soldiers across the range stood, straighter eyes fixed on Elira. She raised her chin, the silver medal catching the last light of the evening. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to hold still. Kalen Drix stood frozen, his career disintegrating in front of the entire command. The smirk, the authority, the power all gone, stripped bare by the very system he thought he controlled. Elira's voice broke the silence one last time. "My father fell so that truth would not be buried. Tonight I've made sure it won't." No one spoke after that. They didn't need to. The truth had been spoken, and it echoed louder than any weapon fired on the range. The fallout was swift and merciless. By dawn, Kalen Drix had been stripped of command and placed under investigation. His rank insignia was removed in silence, his name already whispered as a cautionary tale rather than a badge of respect. The officers who once shielded him now looked away, eager to erase their ties. For Elira Voss, the return was quiet but undeniable. Her suspension was overturned, her record restored. More than that, her name carried a new weight, not as an outlier or an experiment, but as the soldier who had stood against prejudice and refused to bend. When she walked across the compound the next morning, there were no jeers, no smirks. Soldiers moved aside, not out of fear, but recognition. She had earned a place no conspiracy could take from her. Commander Rhogar Senn summoned her privately. His words were brief, but they struck deeper than applause. "The medal you wear," he said, eyes fixed on the silver glint on her chest, "no longer belongs only to the past. You've given it new life. Carry it well." That evening, Elira returned to the firing range. Alone now, with only the wind for company, she set up a single target at the farthest distance. She chambered one round, feeling the familiar weight settle against her shoulder. She breathed in slow and steady and pulled the trigger. The bullet tore through the air and struck dead center. The crack echoed across the empty range, a sound of finality, of triumph. Elira lowered the rifle, eyes closing for a moment. The silver medal caught the last light of the sun, glowing as if her father himself was standing beside her. Justice had been done. Not through revenge, but through truth, made undeniable. And as she walked away from the range, the silence that followed was not empty. It was reverent.